I didn't realize till many years later that this doctor, my doctor, had been arrested a few times for treating people with cancer.
Welcome to the How I Healed It podcast. Here at How I Healed It, we get to hear stories from those who have healed their bodies from the unhealable through alternative methods and the experts who are passionate about whole body health and healing. As I have been on my own healing journey, I have found that the number one thing that has kept me going is learning from others who have gone before me. I believe we can gain nuggets of wisdom from each healing story that we hear. Thanks in advance for subscribing to our podcast so we can continue to bring these amazing stories. I'm your host, Plantfully Megan. Let's dive in. Hey guys, it's Megan and welcome to the How I Healed It podcast. Today I have the honor of chatting with Dr. Dale Figtree. Dr. Figtree is a nutritional health practitioner and a wealth of wisdom on healing the body. In 1977, at the age of 27, Dr. Figtree was diagnosed with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. Her tumor was inoperable and she immediately began chemo and radiation. After 6 months of treatment and enduring the maximum allowable lifetime dose of radiation, her tumor was reduced but not gone. Surgery was not an option, and she was told there was nothing more they could do. It was at that moment that Dr. Dale decided that she wanted to take control of her health, and she completely changed her life in an effort to heal. She is now nearly 50 years cancer-free and has just the most incredible story. I am so excited to introduce to you guys Dr. Dale Figtree. Dr. Dale, thanks for being on today. Yeah. Your story is probably one of the most inspiring stories that I have heard. I think because you were so tenacious in it. And sometimes when I've heard different people's healing stories, you'll hear these really incredible stories, but it'll be like really short where they're just like, oh, and I went raw food for 3 months and then I was completely healed. And you don't get to hear all the backstory and actually what was going on in behind the scenes. And what inspires me about your story is just your tenacity. You're just so hardcore and it's so awesome. And I think that that is actually a lot of people's healing stories who really hold on to the healing effort. Is there's a lot more that goes behind the scenes. And I think you do justice sharing that portion of it. So I'm excited for you to encourage those who are listening who might, whether it's cancer or some other quote unquote incurable disease. I know your story is so encouraging for so many.
Yeah. It's quite an adventure.
Quite an adventure. Let's start at the beginning. Tell us your story. What happened? How did you end up knowing that you had cancer? What's the backstory there?
Well, I was living in New York City and I worked in a design studio, and there were some toxic aspects to it. There was a press, an ink press that gave off some fumes, and a person I was working with was smoking all the time, and just different things. And I started to develop a cough and also a just a strange feeling in my chest, like if I swim too much. Like it was a really weird thing, almost like a water thing, and a little bit of an ache in my shoulder. And I figured it would pass, and it didn't. And after about 2 months, I finally went to a doctor who kind of checked me out, and he said he didn't think it was any big deal. And interesting. And I just kind of went on with it for another month or two. And finally, I was visiting a friend at New York Hospital. And while I was there, I thought, I'm just going to get checked out. So it was an emergency. And I just asked for an x ray. And they came back and they said, you can't leave the hospital. We're checking you in.
Wow.
They said that I had some kind of dark shadow that was covering one of my lungs and my heart. And this was before CAT scans. So with an x-ray, they could just see the shadow, but they couldn't see exactly what it was. So they put me in the hospital. And the first thing is I had a lot of fluid. So they took out the fluid. They checked it to see if there were cancer cells or different things. And there wasn't. And then for 2 weeks, they put me through a lot of different tests. um, all the tests that they had, and they still couldn't get, they tested me for TB and they tested me for all the possibilities.
And you were
And
in the hospital that whole time?
I was in the hospital for, yeah, for 2 weeks, just testing. Actually, it was in New York City, and I used to enjoy going on the roof and watching the skyline. And I find that I've kind of found the hospital fascinating. I used to walk around the different rooms, the different floors, and then finally they said to me, "Look, the last thing, this is we have to do this because we're not getting anything else. We have to do exploratory surgery." And to get in there, they have to cut through my side and open the ribs and go in through that way. For some reason, I was just very present and very open, and I wasn't freaked out or anything. I have to admit to one thing, though, that made a difference. The reason I was in New York was that I was involved with a spiritual community, and there were about 60 of us. And we were living in different houses. I lived in a house with about 12 people, and we had a teacher named Joya. I don't know if you've ever heard of Ram Dass. Never heard of Ram Dass? Okay. Well, he's kind of a famous spiritual leader. He just passed recently, and he was part of the group. So I had a community around me, and I also had kind of a spiritual outlet. Like life is more than what we just see. So I don't know. For some reason, I just had this trust, and I was okay. Anyhow, I went in for the exploratory surgery, and when I came out the next day, what they told me was that they found a tumor the size of a grapefruit that was connected to my left lung, the outside of it, and my heart, my main arteries, and it was unremovable. And they took a biopsy, and from the biopsy, they could tell that it was lymphoma. And then they basically just, sewed me up like halfway around my body, and they said to me that this particular type of malignancy, there's no chemo that just like can like absolutely kill it, but there's chemo that can kind of slow it down. They said there's a good chance that I'll go into premenopause, but it's worth it. And they wanted me to be on that for 3 years. And I was just open. I just thought, just trusting the doctors. Um, and then the other thing that they said is that radiation may also help. So we want to start you on radiation and just see what happens. This was before stem cell transplants. It's before anything like that. And I have to tell you that while I'm in the hospital, sort of waiting for the treatment, my spiritual mentor, this woman, Joya, came in, visited me about 3 days after the surgery. And she just looked at me and she said, and she was very intuitive. I mean, she was just it's something that's hard to explain. And she just said, you can survive this thing if you're willing to work like hell.
Which is exactly what you go on to do.
Yeah. And she also said, and a part of that is understanding what part of you is connected with this happening. And I thought, what is she talking about?
Wow.
Me having it's like I just kind of swooshed that. So she left. So the doctors came, and I agreed to this, and they kept me in the hospital another another month. I mean, I literally was in the hospital for 6 weeks. It was an interesting experience. I have to tell you a funny story that happened in the hospital. So I started treatment, and the chemo, I didn't notice the results. I mean, it was subtle enough so that I wasn't losing my hair. And the radiation, I would just get radiation. I'd lay on the table, there was a machine, it was like an x-ray. You didn't notice anything. But I'd come back to my room and I'd fall asleep and I'd wake up soaked. I'd have to like change my nightgown and change the sheets. And it was like really intense. And anyhow, this continued for So what I was going to say. So in the hospital, about a year before I was in San Francisco, and I bought this Chinese robe or Japanese robe. I'm not sure which one. And on the back of it, it had some kind of a symbol. I didn't know what the symbol said. And I'm wearing this and I'm walking around the halls. And this Oriental doctor stopped me and he said, "Do you know what your robe says?" Um, and I said, "No, I don't. Do you know?" He said, "Yes." He said, "It means long life."
Oh, that's so awesome. I love that. I love that you're touching on the spiritual and emotional aspect of healing, because I think especially when anyone is diving into their healing journey straight on, and I think it's a really good segue, but initially what you're focused on a lot is the physical. It's whether you're working with doctors in a conventional setting or a holistic setting, you're focused more on maybe, the treatments that are being done to you, or the food, if you're going a holistic route, the food that you're eating and consuming, and the coffee enemas and the actions you're doing. But as for me, as I've been on my healing journey longer and longer, so much more I'm realizing the spiritual emotional connection. And I'm curious and wonder, the further down this journey I get, how much is
Right.
really spiritual and emotional, all those components. And it's a little hard as a western culture to explore that, because really our culture doesn't initially lend to that. We're very cerebral and in our head about things, and not as much lending to the spiritual. And so it's so cool how that doctor, like even just the meant to be-ness that you put on that robe because you thought it was beautiful, and almost this prophetic declaration over you of long life, which is so amazing. I just love that so much.
Yeah. 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 Things are changing. I think you've heard of Gabor Mate.
Hmm.
Yeah. I mean, he's such a strong force in bringing in the role that childhood trauma can play. I'm not saying it
Absolutely.
has to, but with a lot of people. And, I think that it's slowly revolving to look at the many layers that can contribute. But when I was doing this, it was like, you know,
Oh, yeah, it was completely not. I mean, it's barely mainstream nowadays, let alone in the 70s.
I didn't know anyone that survived cancer.
Yeah,
I mean, it was interesting.
totally.
But that didn't deter me at all.
Wow.
I just really, I really was not thinking that I would die from this. I just wasn't. As a matter of fact, I'll tell you, I got into this mindset very early on and was able to keep it. And I was also very involved in meditation at that time. And my mindset was that I knew that if I dwelled on negativity, it would be toxic. But I also felt that if I dwelled on too much positivity, it would be trouble. Because in my life, when I just sort of like held these exaggerated kind of positive beliefs, usually, something would happen and, I'd trip over something. And so I learned that the best thing was to just come into a place of not knowing. So I held that. I didn't know if I was going to survive or not, but I was okay with that. I was okay with not knowing, just living my life not knowing, and it became my practice. Okay. And there were a few things that happened that were really kind of pretty wild. One was about a week or two, I'm in the hospital after I got this prognosis and I'm starting treatment. I remembered that 2 years ago, I had a dream that I didn't even write down. I just remembered it was so strong. And it was when I first started to study meditation. I was with this teacher who would put pictures of her teachers on a little altar, and her teachers were these kind of famous yogis from. Most of them were like famous yogis from India, and one was someone named Sai Baba. Okay, and I would look at the pictures. She didn't really talk about these people very much, and so in my dream, I was with Sai Baba, across from him, and he says to me, "There's something, I want to reach into your chest and take something out." And it was like something like a marble or something in my chest. And I said, "Oh, okay." He said, "Lie down." So I lied down, and then I quick sit up, and I said, "Wait a second, where are your tools?" And he laughed. He said, "Just trust me. Just lie down." And I said, "Okay." So I lied down for a second. Then I sat up again, and I said, "Wait a second, where's your anesthesia?" And he said, don't worry, just lie down." So I lied down again, and then I shot up again. I said, "Wait a second, where's your anesthetic?" And he kind of laughed. He said, "Come on, come on, come on." And I said, "Don't touch me," and crossed my arms and did not let him touch me. And 2 years later, I get cancer in that spot.
Oh, that's so interesting.
And I thought, what the heck is going on? And let me just tell you, and I'll tell you further down in the story, but about 40 years later, I understood that it was somehow connected to a trauma in early childhood.
Mm.
I'm not saying that that trauma was the cause or the whole
Yeah.
cause, but it was a connection. Okay. So anyway, that was pretty interesting. Anyway, I started treatment and finally got out of the hospital after 6 weeks. An interesting time. And um, and I'm coming in. I'm going every day for treatment, and every week I'm getting X-rays. And after about 2 months, my doctor calls me in his room and he says, "I want to show you an X-ray, latest X-ray." He said it has another lump in it that wasn't there before. And I was told that my chances of survival, if it hadn't metastasized, were maybe 10% low. But of
If it
course,
had not metastasized, it was a
if it had not
10% chance?
if it had not metastasized, my chances were maybe 10%. But that went in one ear and out the other. What does that mean? Yeah,
So that would mean, though, that if it does metastasize, that the percentage goes down
that means that's
in
forget.
in lo- in most cases, correct?
Yeah,
Yeah,
whatever.
technically
So
speaking.
he said that he spoke with the doctors and they agreed that it was a metastasis. It's about 3 inches below the first one. And they wanted to start me on radiation again the next day in that area, besides the usual area. I said, okay. And suddenly that cracked my veneer. I remember I went home. I was living in Queens at the time, and I was on the subway home, and I felt broken. I mean, I suddenly was thinking about writing my will, and I thought, wow, I might really die from this thing. I just was freaked out. And I got home, and the first thing I did was call Joya, my spiritual mentor, and told her the news. She was in Florida at the time. She said she'd be back at the weekend and we'd get together. She said, "But when I hang up the phone, I want you to just light a candle at your meditation table and just sit and meditate." So I said, "Okay." So hung up the phone and I lit a candle and I sat to meditate. And meditation, usually for me was about paying attention to your breath and quieting your mind. Well, my mind was so crazy. It was like there was no quieting my mind. So I thought, no, 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 this isn't going to work. So I thought what I would do is I do a visualization. So I pictured all the cancer cells like in the bottom of a volcano. So I created a volcano so they were contained. And they were like black spiders clumped together on top of each other. And around the volcano were like hundreds and thousands of white blood cells, like on horses with armor and lances. With a clash of symbols, they came writing down and they pierced and slashed every single cancer cell. And as soon as a cancer cell would be injured, it would just putter and dissolve, putter and dissolve, putter and dissolve, putter and dissolve. And I kept doing it, putter and dissolve, putter and dissolve. And I kept doing it. I kept doing it. And I just was committed to doing it until there were no cancer cells left. And after about 40 minutes, I couldn't find any more cancer cells. It was just pink, healthy cells, like a blue sky almost. And I said, okay, I'm complete, you know. And I opened my eyes and blew out the candle. And I found myself almost in a state of serenity. The fear was completely gone. And I was like high, you know, I was in this kind of elevated state. It was like, wow, this is interesting. I was able to have a good dinner. I had a good night's sleep. And even walking to the hospital the next day, I was just so present, like something had shifted in my being. And I went into the radiation. It was Sloan Kettering. And they said, well, we want to x-ray you before we start radiation on that new spot to get the exact measurements. I said, sure. So I got an x-ray, and my doctor came into the room, kind of scratching his head, looking really strange. He said, we can't find the new lump. He said, but I'm sure it's there. We're just going to x-ray you from different positions. I said, fine. Never found the lump. Never had
Wow.
that x-ray. So
That's amazing. Wow, how empowering that must have felt. So, what was it like for you in that moment? What were you feeling? And was that other large lump that had been connected to your arteries and your lungs still present?
yeah.
That one was still present.
So it was my first wake up call because I thought, wow, there's something more I could be doing than just saying yes, yes, yes to the doctors. I could be involved. That's number one. Number two is that I noticed that when the threat of death was there, I was like hyper active, involved. But when it wasn't there, or at least I didn't think it was there, I kind of slipped back into like a passivity, just saying yes to the doctors. So what I decided to do was that every time I was getting radiation treatments, I would work with it. I would visualize the treatment, the light going in and dissolving, So it was my beginning of getting involved.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So I continued to do that. And then after another month, my housemate left a book around the house about cancer and chemotherapy treatments. And I started to read about these drugs I was taking, and it was pretty shocking. I had no idea. It was like I'm educating myself. I had no idea that they were so toxic. I mean, one was mustard gas. And I just felt immediately I want to stop the chemo. The chemo, I didn't lose my hair, I lost my hair color. So it grew in a lighter shade, and I was on it for like 2 months, 2 or 3 months. And then when I got off it, it grew back normal. So as it grew back, I kind of had this halo. Anyway, I immediately called my doctor to tell him I went off of chemo, and I couldn't reach him. And then 10 minutes later, I get a phone call from my doctor saying, I was trying to call you to let you know that I was in a meeting today with the doctors and we decided to take you off of chemo.
Wow, that's wild.
Yeah.
So, why did they come to that conclusion
They
to
said
take
it
you
was
off?
it was just damaging my immune system too much. And they
Okay.
don't feel like it was really that significant.
Okay. So, you came to the end of chemo, and was radiation still on the table at that point?
It's still that was the only thing left.
Okay.
And they said that my tumor was beginning to shrink. So I had radiation for another month, and then I started to stutter. And I told my doctor about this, and he said, I'm afraid to tell you that you've reached the end of your being able to have any more radiation. I feel like your spine is behind there, and you run the risk of being paralyzed if the radiation is too extreme. So it was 5 months, I think. And so we're going to stop it and let's wait a month because it takes time to, do its thing, and then we'll recheck you in another month. So I came back, and he said, got another x-ray, and he said, well, the tumor has shrunken from the size of a grapefruit to about the size of a walnut. And he said, there's really nothing else we can do. And I said, well, why can't you take it out now? And he said, the radiation will just, you just can't operate. The tissues would fall apart. He said, there's nothing else we can do.
Oh, it just made everything too delicate to be able to go in there safely without killing you.
And
Okay.
he said, rather than put you on super heavy chemo drugs to just slow it down, I mean, that would wreck your life. He said, just go out and enjoy yourself. Let's just see the timing, how this involves. Just come in and we'll check you. We'll just keep our eye on it. And if need be, when we get to that point, then we'll give you that. So he was just letting me go.
Yeah. And how did you feel? And then what did you do after that?
So I felt like it was a terrifying and magnificent moment. Terrifying because
How long into treatments were you at this point? How long from the time that you were in the
five or,
hospital?
5 or 6 months.
5 or 6 months. Okay, so relatively short period of time. You had a lot of chemo and radiation.
Or hey, half a year. Yeah, not so short.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
right now,
Yeah.
I would never give anybody radiation for 6 months. Never. People get radiation. I work with people all the time, maybe 2 months. Never.
Wow, that's crazy. Oh, so you were getting the radiation that entire 6 months.
Yeah, like
That's
5 days a
wild.
week. And I said to my doctor, you know, with all this radiation, what's going to happen like in 20 years? And of course, what he's thinking is, you're not going to need to know. Right? But he said, we don't know. I thought, oh dear. Anyway, when I say it was horrifying, terrifying, and magnificent, the terrifying bit was that I was letting go of this hope. The magnificent was that it woke me up. And I knew that the reins were being placed back in my hands. And it was my turn to just get as deeply and as powerfully involved as I possibly can. So I went home calm, and I immediately lit a candle, sat down, and I asked for help. I created this circle around me. I called on spirit, I called on ancestors, called on people that love me, I called on healers, past, present, and future. And in just a sentence, I explained my situation, and I asked for guidance, I asked for support, and I asked for healing. And then the next day, a whirlwind hit. It's like suddenly I started getting phone calls from people that with suggestions, and I'd have an idea about doing something, and a car would pass me. So I was walking down the street, and I'd see on its license plate, "Go for it." It was like suddenly there was a lot of synchronistic things happening. People called me up and said, "I was thinking you'd be interested in this book," and da 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 da. One person called me up, and she told me she knew of a doctor that had a reputation for miraculous healing, and she thinks I should call him. So immediately I said, thank you. I called him and just got him right away, spoke to him on the phone, told him my situation. He said his secretary would call back and set up an appointment. She never called back. After a few days, I called back and left another message. I never got a real person again. This went on for a month. So I finally realized he wasn't going to call back, but he was the only card in my hand. So I just kind of badgered him. I said, "Look, I really need you to call back, and um, I desperately need you to call back, and I'm not giving up. I am not giving up." So finally, he called up. He said, "Okay, okay." He said, "First, I want you to check out with a friend of mine in Harlem. Go see him, and if he okays you." So he sent me to this guy in Harlem who was about 100 years old, had an office that looked like an antique, and it gave me an X-ray on a machine that well, it must have been 50 years old. It was really weird. Didn't do that much, but we ended up laughing together. And he said, "Come back in another 10 years and we'll have a glass of wine together or something." I mean, it was very funny because in 10 years, this for sure he wasn't going to be there, and we
Yeah.
weren't sure whether I would be there. So
Right.
anyway, he gave the okay, and I finally went and had an appointment. I didn't realize till many years later that this doctor, my doctor, had been arrested a few times for treating people with cancer. Their families would sue them if the people didn't make it. And in those days, it was illegal to treat cancer in any other way than chemo and radiation therapy and
Which
surgery.
isn't much different from today. I think it was more illegal then, but in America, most alternative therapies for cancer aren't really
Right,
allowed.
right. Well, I mean, if someone wants to make a choice to go and die, I mean, it's not like it was then, believe me. It's changed a lot. It was much worse then. Anyway, he saw me and he kind of scribbled down and he pushed this thing my way, and I thought, "You're going to see me again." And I came back the next month and the next month and the next month and the next month, and I just treated this paper like this was like my only thing, and I was committed to it 110%. So I
And
just
he's
got
giving
that
you diet recommendations.
early diet, very specific diet, very specific diet. 3 juices a day and blended salads and certain huge quantities of food. I mean, it was just, in the beginning, I could do breakfast and I could do lunch, but dinner was so much food. It was like halfway through, my stomach would literally be full, but I felt like my life depended upon it. So maybe I'd take a nap and come back, and I just wouldn't go to bed until I stuffed it all in. And then for like 2 or 3 weeks, I went to sleep with a stomach ache, a hot water bottle. But then my stomach stretched, and I could handle, that amount of food. And very shortly after I began, I started to go through some symptoms. First, I kind of started to have a lot of cough up stuff and just have a lot of mucus that looked like it had little black strings in it. I don't know whether I was scar tissue or whatever. And he said, "Great, great, fine." And then I had some loose stools. He said, "Great, the body's cleaning out." And then I had a headache. He said, "Great." And then I became so weak that when I walked up the stairs, I had to sit on the top step to catch my breath. He said, "Fine, the energy's being pulled inside." If he wasn't there every step of the way, I don't know if I would have been able to go on. And I tell this to my clients too, because we're conditioned to think of symptoms as being bad and that they should be stopped. And he was completely the other way, which the symptoms are mostly the brilliance of the body doing what it can do to clear out and to rebuild and whatever. And the scariest thing was I started to lose weight. And when I had first gotten out of the hospital, um, I'd lost weight. I'd lost about 15 pounds in the hospital. And when I got out, there was this obsessive need to like eat, 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 eat. Nothing like I'd ever experienced before. And I wasn't like I was eating a lot of junk, but it wasn't great food. And I put on that 15 pounds very quickly. As soon as I went on this doctor's diet, that 15 pounds within 2 months just dissolved. And having cancer and losing weight is not an easy thing to deal with. but he just said, this has nothing to do with calories. Your body is cleaning out. And in 4 months, on the same amount of food, I started to gain my weight back. And I gained more than I even wanted. So it was really fascinating, fascinating. And then I became fascinated. And when I would go and see him every month, I started asking a lot of questions about, well, why this food and why this food and da 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 da. And he was kind of really happy to answer. At one point, he even took me into his library and showed me some amazing old books along similar lines. And, we bonded. It was really, really good. And this group I was in, it was 60 people, bit by bit. There was a girl that had hypothyroid. She went to see him, went on his diet, and this cleared up. And then someone had something else. And they went to see him, and that was clearing up. And then my mentor, my spiritual mentor, went to see him, and and eventually everybody was doing this. And at that time, they decided to buy this property in Florida, about 3 hours north of Miami, and a big ranch. And we all moved down there. And everybody was on the food program. And this doctor, Dr. Kursu, would come down once a month
Oh, that's
and see
awesome.
each of us. It was really cool. And the blessing of this, I can't begin to tell you. People were making the food. It's like I would go in the kitchen and there'd be a huge tray of washed carrots, a huge tray of washed celery. I just put them in a bowl, take them to the juicer, run it through. It was like it was a total gift. I mean, it was just a total. And I started having less and less symptoms and feeling more and more normal. Before I left for Florida, I went and saw my doctor in New York again. And he said to me, scratched his head, and he said, according to your blood work, you're my healthiest patient. He said, but the lump is still there. And he said, I don't understand it because you had a very fast growing malignancy and it's not growing. And he said, I don't. I think first he said, what are you doing? And I told him, and he said, well, I don't get it, but don't stop doing it. That was that. So I moved to Florida. And we were all doing it, and I just was feeling good. And really, this went on for 3 years. Just sort of forgot about it. You know what I mean? Um, but remained very strict. I mean, I didn't forget about it to the degree that I changed anything. I mean, I just did it, but it just made it so easy. And then after 3 years, one day I just coughed up what was like a golf ball size piece of mucus. I thought, what is that? And then I started to have these kind of um, strange things with my eyes, like flashes. And then I started to cough up more of that mucus. And then within a week, I had fever, and it got to like 103.5 or something. And then I started to have a pain where I had cancer. And there was one of the people at the ranch, one of the people in our group was a medical doctor who was totally freaked out. And he said, you have to get an x-ray and get checked for pneumonia and da da da. And I said, okay. So I got an x-ray and they compared it and it was the same. The lump hadn't changed, it was the same. And I didn't have x-ray, I didn't have not x-ray, I didn't have pneumonia. It was like nothing they could find. And my own doctor, who was in New York, said, I believe that what you're going through, he said, not everybody goes through this, but I believe that some people do. You're going through what's called a major detoxification.
Oh, wow. 3 years after you started.
3 years after.
Wow.
Took 3 years to reach this point.
Wow.
But I was figuring things out, like the pain. I asked someone for a tennis ball, and I laid on my back on the tennis ball, and it was like acupressure. It pressed and pressed and pressed and nerve until suddenly there was no pain left. So as soon as there was pain, I just lie on that and I'd be fine for a few hours. And people were bringing me food. And then I started to just go through strange things from itching and my skin breaking out, and I totally didn't have no period during this time. And I
So
started
this
dropping.
was so you started and then you had 3 years of kind of just coasting and feeling pretty fine.
And every once in a while, there'd be an episode,
Okay.
a cleansing episode,
Okay. What would that entail within
like
that
diarrhea,
3 year time?
diarrhea,
Diarrhea. Okay.
some sores in my mouth, some breakouts with my skin, some itching.
Okay. But nothing like this. So then at the 3
So
year mark,
I was in bed with fever
got
and
it.
I was dropping weight. So the first month I lost 10 pounds. The second month I lost another 10 pounds. Nobody I knew or this doctor had ever seen anybody with a fever for 2 months. And then the third month, it did not let up. I lost another 10 pounds. I'm down to 90 pounds, and everybody on the ranch thinks I'm dying. I remember a friend came down from New York to visit the ranch. She walked in my room. She looked at me, started crying, and ran out. But for some reason, I did not think I was dying. And somebody brought me this book. I wasn't raised Christian, but they bought me this book by this woman, Taylor Caldwell, I think her name was. And she was like a Christian mystic. She wrote this book about Christ. And a friend of mine brought it. And I thought, sure, I'll read it. I'm just lying in bed all day. And I was very moved by this book. There was something very elevating, very touching. And it was right in the beginning of this. And I felt like I was bathed in a kind of light, in a kind of loving light. The whole time I went through this, it was strange. But I really felt like it's like how could I go through 3 months like this and not be completely like freaked out? But I had this. I felt like I had this blessing, and then another thing happened, which is somebody that was bringing my food said that last night when the whole group was together, they said one of the girls in the group stood up and said that she was very disturbed that I'm not being taken to a hospital. That everybody on the ranch is like a little bit disturbed. They're thinking that I'm not doing anything, that I'm just laying there. Okay. And my teacher Joya just said, "You have no idea what she's going through. Just like mind your own business." But when I heard this, I thought, I could be doing more. It's like, why aren't I doing visualization? So that night, I decided to do visualization. So I sit on my pillow and I light a candle and I try to do visualization and I'm just nodding out. I'm just nodding out, nodding out. And I keep fighting it. I keep fighting it and I keep fighting it, keep nodding out and I keep fighting it. And finally, at some point, I just suddenly wake up and I'm wide awake and I do an intensive visualization. And I'm so awake with so much energy that I could not go to sleep that night. My body would
Wow.
not fall asleep. So I understood that something happened. Who knows what? Who knows what? It was, again, one of those, kind of things. Okay. Anyway, at the end of 3 months, this doctor at the ranch was freaked out. He thought any day I'm going to go. I'm going to just not wake up. And he said, and
Which
I
makes sense from what people are used to observing happen. I think that's not necessarily like an unrealistic response from his
right,
point of view, especially when you haven't heard of anybody going through what you've gone through.
yeah. And I wasn't honest with my parents who lived up north in Philadelphia. Um, I didn't tell them what was going on. And he came in my room. He said, "I think your parents should come down here." He said, "Seriously." And I knew that basically what he was saying, he may not have much time. He walked out of the room, and I was a little shaken by what he said. And I realized that, I didn't believe that I had cancer, but I thought maybe I could die from just detoxing. And I thought, I cannot do this anymore. And it was like I reached in and with the most ferocity I could connect to, I literally said, enough. And the next day, my fever stopped. Within 5 days, I gained a few pounds. And I started the uphill journey. And then I suddenly started breaking out in all the symptoms of chemotherapy from 3 years before. My hair started to grow in light, the same. I had sores in the same place. I had rashes in the same place. There was no question, and so with my doctor, Dr. Curcio, there was no question that I was retracing, that it took this intensity to pull up and get out not only the chemo, but the underlying cause of the cancer and all the other things that had kept me out of balance. Like growing up, I always had irregular periods and my skin was broken. It was like whatever needed to clear. And when I started to regain weight, it was like I grew a new body. And my menstrual cycle came back perfect for the first time in my life. I mean, it was
Wow.
like everything, my hair was healthier, everything was, yeah, yeah. And so
Wow.
I kind of regrew a new body, and that was that. And then a few months later, something happened with my heart.
Mhm.
It went into a very rapid, fast heartbeat for a very long period of time, and I ended up having to go to the hospital. And my X-rays were so crazy, full of radiation scarring, that they could not even tell what was going on. And they suggested I go back to New York Hospital, where my original doctor was. So I went back to New York Hospital, and he met me at the door, took me in a little room, examined me. He said, "Look, there's a good chance the cancer is back, but now we have new chemotherapy, and we may have to do surgery to let out the fluid around your heart, and blah, blah, blah." I was thinking, how can I escape? Anyway, I was in the hospital for a week, and it was a teaching hospital. So these doctors would come around, and I'd explain to them what I went through the last 3 months with the detox and the rest, gaining back my weight. And they thought I was nuts, just completely nuts. Anyhow, went through a lot of testing. They did bone marrow. Don't ask. And the last thing was they finally had CAT scans. And so I had a CAT scan, and my doctor walked in the room smiling, and he said, "No trace of cancer." He said they felt that I had something called pericarditis, which is common if you have radiation in the heart area. It's like a bug that you can catch, and it causes the fluid to build up around the heart. But because of my scar tissue, if fluid builds up, kind of backs into the heart. It doesn't, it's not in the heart, it's on the outside of the heart, and it can cause a fast heartbeat. But he said it's clear. It's worked its way through. And he said, "You're free to go." And I remember, when my parents picked me up, I got in the car and just started to cry because I finally got, what a nightmare, it could have been. I met people my age in the hospital who had lymphoma, who were going through horrendous treatment, and my doctor was confiding in me, "This one's not going to make it." And I just got in the car, and it was like, I mean, it's like the first time I was in the hospital, it was like all new and fascinating and interesting. It's in a different headspace. And this time it was like I was just so shaken. I was just so shaken that I had come close to that. And anyway, I left the hospital and, basically have been fairly well ever since. You know, I mean, years later, I've come to recognize that the intense scarring There are issues with that in the lung and around my heart, and just um, yeah, I didn't get away completely, afraid of dues to be paid. I kept remembering my doctor saying, what happens in 20 years, and now it's almost 50 years. And that's actually, to tell you the truth, recently I was at my pulmonary doctor's office, and he had a picture of my X-ray up on his screen, and he had a resident that he was teaching, and he was going like pointing to it and say, "That's her, that's her." Like, can you believe it? That's her. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Because I mean, I'm on my treadmill half an hour a day, and I mean, not that there aren't some little issues here and there, and whatever.
So what has your lifestyle looked these past, well, now almost 50 years,
Okay,
like after you got the clear?
okay. So, well, first of all, I ended up leaving the community after 6 years and moved to California. People started to call me and say, "I heard about you. I have cancer, or my child has cancer, or whatever. And, what did you do? Can you give me that information?" And my doctor had retired. He didn't train people because of he had been arrested and he didn't write books. And I was like, so I started to tell them what I did. And then after a while, I thought two things. One, it's not enough to tell people what you do. If someone isn't there to walk you through the walk, you're gonna freak out. And the second thing is that I could get arrested. I mean, I'm just like, who am I? Just and so the more people started to call, the more I felt tugged to ultimately go back to school and get a degree. And it was interesting because I was involved. My partner at the time was a chiropractor. So he was in the health field, and he told me about this extraordinary teacher that he had that taught nutrition in his college who, and well, before we get into that, I thought, should I do this? Because I'm still an artist and I'm still doing artwork and stuff. But I felt like yeah, just check it out. And I found this college called the American College of Nutrition, and it was sort of like Antioch, where you don't have to live there. You can get your anatomy and physiology and stuff at the university, and stuff like that. Write a
Yeah.
dissertation. So I called them, and they were just way too expensive. But they didn't let me off the phone. They wanted to know more about me, and I by that time, by the way, I did write a book, but it was the kind of book where I got it published at the Xerox store for
Right.
something else called Health After Cancer. So when people called me, I could say, "Look, I just can't tell my story again, but I wrote this book, and so I'm charging the cost." So that's what I was doing. I was selling the book. So I told them about this book, and they said, "Well, would you send us a copy?" I said, "Sure." So I sent them a copy, and about 3 weeks later, I get this note from them that I'm awarded a full scholarship, and my book is accepted as my dissertation.
Oh, that's awesome.
And it was like, in vaudeville, they wanted somebody off the stage. They bring this hook and they like yank the. I felt like I just got yanked into this thing, and I was grateful, and I spent um, 2 years, going through all of these things, and then this doctor that trained my boyfriend in his school, I asked if I could apprentice with him, and he worked with blood work. He knew more about blood work than any medical doctor I ever met. He worked more with supplements than food, but I could translate it, and he accepted me as an apprentice. And so he gave me the piece of the puzzle that enabled me to interact with medical doctors, which took this to a whole new level, which my own doctor didn't have that. And so, I just ended up starting to do this work, and bit by bit, people came. And it just unfolded like that.
Yeah, that's amazing. And
Yeah,
so that now you have multiple books out that
yeah,
you've
yeah,
published.
yeah. I mean, one of them, after about 4 years, I got re-involved with a different person than man that I had been involved with many years before, a European, and I moved to Spain for a few years, and I kind of gave up the. I worked a little bit by telephone, but I don't know. I just felt the need to do this, and um, sort of got back into my art. And my stepson, this man's son, was this overweight kid that always gave me a problem whenever I tried to get him to eat healthy food. And finally, he was so fed up with his weight, he said, "Help me." So his father and I just wrote down everything that he liked, and we changed it to healthier foods. And he ended up, after like 9 months, this tall, lanky teen, great teen. And I decided to write a book about it. So I wrote a book called, Eat Smart, A Guide to Good Health for Kids, and I illustrated it. And I sent it to a few publishers, and one picked it up and published it. It was like, wow. So that was great. Yeah. And then later on, all my clients have been asking me, are there cookbooks you can suggest? And there actually weren't. There weren't. I mean, there was raw food cookbooks and there was vegetarian cookbooks, but each one had some piece that was just not right. And so I felt motivated to then write the cookbook, and that was the third one. And then I ended up doing a DVD where, I was able to explain things more. And just recently I published a new book called The Gifting of Dreams, which takes us back to the first dream. Okay. So that first dream was Sai Baba wanting to reach into my, you know. So what I stumbled across, studying dreams and listening to Gabor Mate and different people about traumas, early childhood traumas, how they could be connected and this and that, was that when I was 11, I had a grandfather who had bipolar. He wasn't well, and he was babysitting for me one day, and he tried to reach into my shirt and feel my breast, and I was so freaked out. I just pushed him back and knocked him over, ran out of the house, just got on my bike, just rode around the block for an hour like a crazy person until my parents came home. I couldn't tell my parents. My father had a horrible temper. I knew if I told my father, he would kill him on the spot. I'd probably divorce my mother. I mean, I wish I had the sense to be able to say, get my mother aside and say, look, let's not talk about dad like that, but don't
Right.
ever leave your father with a,
Yeah.
I wasn't
But
wise.
when you're a kid, you
Yeah.
can't.
So
Yeah.
when I realized that and then realized the dream, I'm not saying I don't believe that I had cancer because my grandfather tried to feel me up, but it's interesting. There's a connection. I mean, it's not nothing, it's a piece of the puzzle, which may have to do with fear, may have to do with aggression. I mean, who knows? I'm not saying that I understand it, but what I'm acknowledging is that, wow, that could be a part of it. And how does one bring that kind of stuff more to the surface and make it more conscious and let it go? So those are more my questions these days and work these days, when I look at that. And so when people come to me with cancer, um, I try to encourage them to work on many levels. I mean, the food. Okay, I want to get back to another thing with that. You asked me what I did when I left. If I hadn't become a nutritionist, I could see what was happening. I was beginning to slip. My friends didn't really eat like I ate. I had a boyfriend that was a musician. I mean, smoked a lot of pot, drank. Not that I did that, but I wasn't really getting encouragement. And slowly, I was not as strict. And then when I became a nutritionist, I could hear what I was saying to people, and it reflected back on a mirror. So it was an interesting gift to me to be telling people what I needed to continuously hear. And so it kept me on track all these years. I still make my juice in the morning two instead of three a day. I have two a day. Mind you, if it ever occurred to me I wanted a sip of wine, no problem. If I was over at my sister's house and she had some pizza and I mean, I feel like I have the leeway to enjoy myself with, treats like that. But my main um, my main structure is basically extremely high nutrient quality food, breakfast, lunch,
Yeah.
dinner,
Yeah.
and I still maintain it.
That's really, really good. I think that's one thing for me on my health journey with stage 4 endometriosis was I remember the moment when after my fourth surgery and it came back just as quick as it did from the other, like within 9 months that it was always back. And I had this moment where I realized, oh man, like my life is never going to be the same. Like I'm going to have to make some changes to my lifestyle and it will be forever. It's not going to just be, hey, let's do this little diet for a few months and then I'll be fine, or let's get this surgery and then after the surgery everything's back to normal. And in one way, I wish I had recognized that sooner. But in another way, how could you whenever you're just, not taught any of that, or you don't really come to that realization of this is a lifestyle. When we say lifestyle change, it really means your life is changing from here on forward. You yourself in a way have to become a whole different person. It's not just a little change that you make and you move forward. It's everything.
Yes, yes, and it's waking up
Yeah.
because the bottom line is, how do I support clearing the underlying cause?
Yeah.
Even more so than how do I treat this?
Yeah.
How do I support removing the underlying cause and not recreating it?
Right.
And the body knows how to do that for the most part. We're just poorly educated. We're our conditioning is fed by big pharmacy, dollars, and the food industry that they're very connected to. And so, we are educated the opposite way, which is enjoy yourself, get addicted to this food, even though it's the golden road to every, uh, kind of degenerative illness that there is.
Yeah. Yep.
And then we have pills that will control it. And when I see doctors and talk about underlying causes, they scratch their head and say, "Well, we wish we knew." It's like, oh man, oh man. So for me, it's just when I have a client, I literally try to shake them awake and say, this is about re-educating yourself to what is wise to put in your body as fuel and what will give your body's brilliance, the support to go where it needs to go and do what it needs to do to survive as long as it can in the best way that it can. And it does. And it does. I mean, the body can do that and wants to do that. And that, I mean, part of my writing the book for kids was that I thought kids love to understand how things work. If you can present it in ways that are interesting and fun. And it's not hard to present to kids, this is how the body works. And so the story that I wrote is really like Nutrition 101 for kids, but it's funny and, it's illustrated and stuff like that. But, my hope was that children will get it at an early age. And
And I
before,
think I
yeah.
think kids can understand it. I have this memory of being in fourth grade at my public school. And the teacher had been teaching us all about, I don't know why, we were learning about plants and how they grow. And we had talked about how they spray things on the plants so the bugs don't kill them. And I remember raising my hand and asking the question, if the stuff we're spraying on the plants is killing the bugs, isn't that bad for us? And she said, "Oh no, like it washes off." And and then I remember asking, well, if it washes off and it goes into the water, because we just learned that the plants suck up the water, isn't it getting sucked up into the plant and aren't we eating it? I remember asking her that, and she was just like, "Oh no, it's safe. It's totally safe." And I think there's just a lot of things that are just very logical that even children can understand, but we have been so brainwashed by the different large industries that are out there that it's safe, it's fine, everything is good. Here's a picture of a farm, we're all happy, when that's not the case. And so what we unfortunately have to do as adults is unbrainwash ourselves. I think people will think I'm quite extreme with the way that I'm eating or doing my life, but the reality is actually, what if our society is so extreme and so far from what is natural and healthy and healing to our bodies that now they think eating clean foods is extreme and eating McDonald's is not.
But less and less. 50 years ago, a health food store would be this tiny little thing buried someplace. If you were into healthy things, you'd be called a health nut. Now, every single food store, big food store, like Vons and Albertsons, and they have their organic food section. I mean, things are changing. It's slow, but they are changing. And the fact that Whole Foods, these big supermarkets and Sprouts are doing great, and they're basically healthier foods. So it just takes time. But I would say in these 50 years, it's like what I've witnessed, and especially with the internet, is that there is awakening up and there is an implication. And, it's like just recently I put out an email on Facebook, and shocking email, because like 20 or 30 of the brands, the really healthy brands that I've been using for, 20, 30 years, in terms of the kind of beans I get, and, different things. Practically every one of these companies have been bought up by Kraft or Kellogg. I mean, to see this is so shocking. On one hand, what's interesting is that they realize that there's a lot of money in healthier things. The sad thing is that they do what they do, which is where they can make money and replace cheaper materials. They do. And so, but this is life. This is life. This is what happens. And so it makes you more aware, and you just do what you can. At this moment, shopping from farmers markets is really, if it's possible, is really the gift. But nothing's perfect. But what I've also discovered is that I feel like the body is really flooded with strong nutrients, that its ability to fend off these toxicities is much greater than if it weren't. So you just do the best you can, and you remain in that state of not knowing.
That's beautiful. I love that. I love that you shared that because I think what I found, even as people have watched me go through what we're going through with I like to call it our prolonged fertility journey and endometriosis and all that. And people love me and they want what's best for me. So there's this tension between being authentic and realistic with this is what I'm working through, this is what's happening, but not going to this dark place of depression and sadness, and then this other space of like delusional, like only say positive words, don't recognize or give, like, you can't even, you have to almost be, it's almost delusional of just like everything's fine, nothing's wrong, you know? And so there's this balance, and I like what you said, where you kind of let go, and you're neither delusional and overly positive, nor are you going into the depths of despair and darkness, and you're just in this place of, I'm on this journey, and whatever will be, and I'm
And I just do
open
the best
to
I
the
can.
journey.
And I
Yeah.
just do the best I can. Yeah, yeah. But at the same time, when things seem scary or whatever, and then believe me, there are times, you know, that's when I call in visualization, prayer, do intensive research there's so many. I mean, I love that the healing arts are arts. I mean, they're so creative. It's really always an amazement to me. I mean, between magnets and heat, and I mean, there are just so many incredible healing tools. It's like you just keep getting pushed to go deeper and find more. So, it's a process, and taking care of ourselves. It's work, and it's a process, and it's also gifted. You invite, you have intention, and life has a way of many times responding. So
Yeah, that's beautiful. Thank you so much, Dr. Dale. It's been such an honor having you on.
oh,
Can you tell the people who are listening that might want to get in touch with you the work that you're doing now and the best way to connect with you?
okay. So since COVID, I closed my physical office and reopened my art studio, which is wonderful for me. And I work with people mostly on Zoom. If they're not computer literate, then phone calls or whatever, you're fine. And I have my website, dalefigtree.com. Anybody could reach me through that. And my books are all on Amazon. And the cookbook is, it's broad. It's not necessarily for somebody that's dealing with cancer. I mean, it's like the whole family. And the kids' book is just I'd say it's for kids, teens, and the whole family. There are lots of fun recipes in that. And then my own book, it used to be Health After Cancer. Now it's called Beyond Cancer Treatment, Clearing and Healing the Underlying Causes. And then this new book, The Gifting of Dreams, all on Amazon. So,
Love it. Thank you so much. Thanks so
my
much, Dr. Dale. It's been a pleasure having you on.
and
Have
thank
a
you
good
for
night.
asking. It's really a pleasure to share and
Yeah.
just share the gifts, share the
Yeah.
gift. Yeah.
Yeah. I think we need more testimonies out there and more stories of people who have healed, because there's just nuggets that I know everyone who's listening, they're going to pull something from your journey that they can apply to their own. And it's just spreading that love, light, and healing around the world. So it's so awesome.
Absolutely. I'm absolutely for that. And thank you
Love
so
it.
much for giving
Yes,
me the opportunity to share it. Yeah.
absolutely. Awesome. All right. Thank you so much. Thank you guys for joining us on the How I Healed It podcast, and we'll see you next time.